I ended up going on Iraq because no one else wanted to go, and I was like the third straw. Okay, can you go for us? And I just was there on one trip, and I just felt like this is where I need to be. I went and told my wife, and she said, no way. She was pregnant with our first child. And then a few years later, literally a few years later, after doing several trips, taking teams there to help with a community centre there, we ended up deciding to move, and just happened to be on the same day that another group of people decided to move to Iraq. Yeah.
Who was?
The Islamic State. Welcome to Justice Matters, the podcast inspiring a world where everyone belongs. I'm your host, Tim Buxton. Hey there guys, it's Tim here for another episode of Justice Matters. Today, I'm on the other side of the microphone. I got interviewed by the lovely Monique Gaudion. I don't know if I pronounced that right, Monique, but she is the host of the Boffola Podcast. Hopefully I pronounced that one correctly too, but she and I had a great time last week, and we sat down here in my studio, and though I was being interviewed by her for her podcast, I did ask for special permission to be able to share it with you today. So hopefully you'll get to know a little bit more about me. Monique attended the TEDx Currumbin event, where I had the privilege of speaking along with many other great presenters, sharing their stories and their powerful ideas with the world. And we get a bit of a behind the scenes look into why I chose the topic of seeing refugees as waymakers, but also you'll get to know a bit more of my story and my journey as well. So thanks for tuning in, guys. We're pretty much getting the end of the year, end of 2021, and the end of season 3. We've got one more episode for you, a special episode that I won't spoil you about, but I just recorded it yesterday, and we've got one more episode before we round out the year, guys. I hope you're having a wonderful time. I know the world is kind of reeling again with all that's going on with Omicron and, just craziness everywhere you go. Just keep well, guys, and keep looking out for your neighbours, those around you that are struggling. Together, we all look out for each other. I know that we can continue to make this world a more beautiful and more just world for us all to live in. Thanks again. Enjoy this episode with yours truly and the wonderful Monique Gaudion.
Welcome everybody to the Boffola Podcast. It's so wonderful to have you back. And I've got the wonderful Tim Buxton here today. How you doing, Tim?
Lovely, Monique. Thank you so much for joining me in this lovely abode we have.
Yes, so I'm actually in a proper podcasting studio, which is the first ever. Yes, hello. There's cameras, there's everything. It's pretty exciting. A little intimidated by the big mic, but that's okay. So, Tim, I met you at the TEDx Currumbin. You gave a chat, a TEDx talk, and which is now, is it up on
It is
TED
up on YouTube,
Talks?
yes, and TED
Talks?
homepage, I think.
Yeah, so
live.
it's all good to go now.
It's all good to go. It's up and away.
So, folks, if you want to hear Tim Buxton, Buxton, he's on the TED Talk. So, Tim, how are you?
I'm so grateful just to sit across. I remember we were chilling out in the intermission, I guess, halfway through, and you came up, and I remember seeing you there, and we just had a great conversation.
I know, it was great. I was hanging around with you and your wife.
Yes.
It was really nice. So that was great fun.
It was a hoot.
Now, Tim, I've told you a little bit about this podcast, that it's really just an opportunity for people to share a story. Now, I have heard you talk about some of the events that happened for you, which was precipitated your business, or what do you call it?
Not-for-profit
charity. Maybe we could start off with that and then
Sure.
just see where we go.
Yeah, I would say the charity that we started,
Yep.
I'd like to call a social impact organisation, because charity sometimes sounds very like I'm just pitying you, and that's certainly not my vision of charity, and I certainly don't want to make a loss, so non-profit just sounds terrible too. Yeah. So social impact, how can we do whatever we do, whatever to bring a social impact? And for us, it's what I believe are the most vulnerable people on this planet, which are people that have been forcibly displaced from their homes, which makes them vulnerable to the elements. It makes them vulnerable to all kinds of other human rights injustices, whether it be human trafficking, forced labour. It really is the root cause for so many other forms of injustices. So for me, it's like I want to make sure people that are displaced feel like they belong, and hence the word for the charity that we came up with, our organisation, is You Belong.
Yeah, which is beautiful. It's simple and it's a crisis, actually, isn't it, in the world today? I mean, it's been like that for quite a while. I know when I've travelled overseas, I've seen lots of refugees, selling Eiffel Towers in Paris and beads in Greece and stuff like that. But it's just got worse and worse over the years, hasn't it?
Well, I think it has. I mean, since World War II, there's now 80 million. It's the most since World War II displaced. 80 million people, and 40% are children. So I could throw out statistics to you. Yeah, so 40% are under the age of 18. So when we're talking about these waves or masses of people, which I think the media over sensationalizes, and you just get these lump statistics, you kind of get a bit desensitized. But when you look at the face of a child and think that, 4 out of every 10 refugee is a child.
That's a great way to bring it down, 4 out of 10.
Yeah.
It's much more graspable. You can kind of connect with that.
Yeah,
that
we're
sort
not
of
talking about the fear mongering kind of stuff that's plastered on our news. It's that get us, they're knocking down our walls and trying to, take our jobs, and the absolute opposite is the truth. They are the most courageous, most intelligent, most integrous, most resilient, most broken and traumatized too, and vulnerable. Yet they're all that and one, and I think they're a picture of, I think when we look at them, of our own selves, our own lives. They're just a mother, a father, a teacher, someone that's just lost it all. And I think the people that have taught me the most throughout my whole life. And so it's actually a joy to just kind of live my life to pay it back, I guess.
Oh, it's great. So maybe we could back it up a bit and go to Syria, I think. Iraq. Can we swing back to that?
Yes.
And then that can bring us forward as to why you're doing what you're doing now.
Can I go before Iraq?
Yeah.
Is that all right?
Please. Yeah.
I was saying this before. I was born in Indonesia. My parents were missionaries in Indonesia and also in West Papua, which is the Indonesian side of New Guinea, Irian Jaya at the time. I had the most amazing parents. They just wanted to serve those, the poor, the those in need. They showed me what it was to live for others, to be the most hospitable people in the planet. I remember growing up, when we moved back to Australia, and every Christmas time, when it's almost Christmas and we've got the Christmas coloured light things on right now, and
green folks.
I just didn't get the memo. I should have worn my green T-shirt. But every Christmas, we'd always have someone from the local low security prison that would come and spend Christmas with us. My parents were just constantly, those that were on the outside of society were just welcomed in our home. We always had people from all over the world staying with us because they'd had so many connections with different cultures and countries. And, my baby pictures were me as a little white boy in a Dani village in the highlands of New Guinea. I mean, I think I even remember all my friends at school were Indian or from other countries, and I didn't choose this life.
No.
It chose me.
And how old were you when you left?
So I don't remember.
I
don't remember, except from my parents. I was 3. My parents, my dad in particular, had these photo albums. Like we had about 12 or 13 photo albums that were just these massive, like like 2 inches or 10, 5 centimeters thick of just like page after page after page of photos. Kind of like back in the day when you'd go the slides, and then we had those too. So anyway, so we'd have so many of these pictures that I kind of relived my childhood through. But I think there was this one common theme, to bring it back to my parents and the hospitality that they showed, is that I grew up feeling like my parents showed us that you're just supposed to make people feel welcome. You're just supposed to make people feel loved and accepted wherever they're at for who they are. And it was something that was ingrained in me.
What a wonderful heritage for you.
Oh, my gosh.
To have that. Because, what you get in the first 7 years of your life, or first 4 years, but first 7 years, is actually how you see the world, how you perceive the world. It's a basis for that. So you're very blessed, actually.
Exactly. And that's why you can't take credit for anything, really. You just thank.
Yeah.
Be thankful.
Yeah. Okay. So,
moved to New York.
Oh.
Like most people do when they're in their 20s. Skipped a whole big chunk of life there.
Did you go to uni?
I did, and I dropped out after 6 months.
Okay. What were you studying?
I was studying human movement, so I thought
really?
I did pretty good at school. Thought I wanted to be sports physio. I love sports. I love adventure. Realised, I ended up dropping out, going to Bible college. So I went because I really felt like I wanted to help people, right? And that's what you do when you grow up with parents that, grew up in the church, and this was the obvious basic, way to do it. And so
that's right. It's the known.
It's the known, yeah. And so I went to Bible college. It took me 14 years to graduate from Bible college.
Oh, and this is in New York?
No,
you
so
went
this
to
was
Bible.
This was here in Australia. And then at 22, without graduating, I just got a round the world ticket. Went around the world and went to this church in New York City that was known for helping drug addicts and homeless people, and I just fell in love with it. I was like, this is what I want to do, and so I ended up getting a job.
Was that in Harlem or something like that?
No, it was in Times Square. It was called Times Square Church.
Okay.
I mean, it was started back in the day when Times Square was known for just like
people living on the streets.
Just living on the streets. There was, drug deals on every corner. I mean, this was before they tried to clean it all up. It was just notorious back in the day.
Didn't know that.
Yeah, and so they started a church there, and they reached out to the gangs and the poor and the vulnerable, and so it's my kind of deal. Like, there's actually, someone that loves or values ancient scripture. One of my favourite verses is that God lives with the poor and the brokenhearted. So if you want to actually be where God is, just hang around people that are broken and poor. That's kind of where you find him. And so
that's who Jesus hung around.
Hey,
right?
You better bite your dollar. He did.
Yeah.
But anyway, so yeah.
Huh.
So I went to New York and then worked there for 10 years, met my incredibly stunningly beautiful wife, used every ounce of Aussie charm I could find.
Oh, so sweet.
And
was she in that church?
And she wasn't. She was living in South Africa at the time. She was working with AIDS orphans.
Oh,
and
okay. So similar way of seeing the world. Yeah.
Totally. So she left and lived in a Russian army tent by herself. I mean, you've seen see her little blonde-haired, petite
small,
figure living in the middle of KwaZulu-Natal in a Russian army tent. She spent 3 months by herself living out of her car, waiting for the electric and the water to be turned on at one of the orphan centres in AIDS orphan centres, and didn't leave until they got power. That's how courageous and determined she was for these little kids. And so obviously meeting someone like that, and if you've seen her, she's drop dead gorgeous. I mean, I did everything I could, and thank God I've got an Aussie accent, right? Works a charm on those Americans.
So she's American.
She's from New York, yeah.
Oh, okay. So she went home.
She went home, and I saw her, and that was
Americans love Aussies, don't they?
I tell you what, they do. We don't really pay him back in the same way, though, do we?
Oh, we won't go there.
No, we won't.
I have lots of American friends, actually. Yes. Yeah.
Well, I'm American now, so you better be careful what you say about Americans. So.
Yankee, hey? Yankee Doodle.
I know. I go for the Mets. Hence, there's a New York Mets hat there.
Oh, okay.
I do not go for the Yankees. Anyways, then we ended up going to Iraq. I ended up going for work because I was working for this church, and I ended up going on Iraq because no one else wanted to go, and I was like the third straw. Okay, can you go for us? And I just was there on one trip, and I just felt like this is where I need to be. I went and told my wife, and she said, no way. She was pregnant with our first child. And then a few years later, really literally a few years later, after doing several trips, taking teams there to help with a community centre there, we ended up deciding to move, and just happened to be on the same day that another group of people decided to move to Iraq. Yeah.
Who was?
The Islamic State.
Oh,
so everyone knows ISIS.
Yes.
They...
Oh, my goodness me. That's pretty full on, right? Man. Yeah, okay. Continue.
Yeah.
Let us just take that in.
Yeah, I mean, I showed this picture of my wife holding our 3 young children in the TED Talk, right? So a 9-week-old baby Lily, 1-year-old actually, she corrected me afterwards. He wasn't 2, it was 1. And a 1-year-old Charlie and a 3-year-old Eliana. And we had 3 young children, it's 50 degrees, and we land, and literally 50 kilometres away, there is ISIS coming across the border. We had no clue. They're invading the city of Mosul. And overnight, people are displaced from Mosul, from all over Iraq. They were already spreading.
So they're just running away from
people
ISIS,
are just basically just fleeing. And if they didn't, especially ethnic minorities, religious minorities, if they didn't flee, they would be killed, enslaved. I mean, thousands and thousands of women were enslaved and used in sex slavery and human trading by ISIS. Most of the men were just killed because they were a threat, and it was. I mean, we were there for 3.5 years. It was yes, it was intense, but it you saw the best and the worst in humanity in crisis, and I think sometimes we think there's only the worst to be seen. And yes, we could highlight all these terrible things, but what we witnessed of a local community in Iraq welcoming our family was the most incredible gift I would ever receive in my life.
Yeah, I think in the TED Talk you showed a picture of 2 Muslims from 2 different
religious minorities, Shabak,
Shabak,
Shia Muslims, and Yazidi Muslims.
Who had, under normal circumstances, were in opposition to each other.
Yeah,
or
I mean,
enemies, or just
100%.
not aligned, but they became friends. And
yeah, look, Muslims and Yazidis did not get along well in this area, whether you were Shia Muslim, Sunni Muslim. The different people groups just lived in their own kind of like echo chambers, which I guess, we do the same in the West here. We live in our little group or tribe of people that we get along with, and don't have a lot of high tolerance for people that are different to us. No different there, except, they will actually, wage war in some circumstances. And so...
Well, it's a different culture.
It's a different culture. So... And let's just be honest, ISIS was funded by various geopolitical powers. I think
the
US was funding
ISIS
them in
actually.
Syria, Australia, like all these, Russia. I mean, it's when you really get down to it, you can't just generalize a culture, and you can't just generalize you've got, like what we were saying before, you've got to see 2 men standing side by side weeping because it's time for them to go back home. ISIS has been kicked out of Mosul. ISIS is getting kicked out of Sinjar, where both of those are from, and they want to go back home, but they don't want to say goodbye to each other because for 3 years they've shared food together. For 3 years they've lived side by side. They were forced to care for each other and live in community with each other, get their children educated in the school that we had for them. They were weeping. You saw those photos. It moved you to tears. They were weeping.
It'd be great if I could get that photo and 100%. Put it on the Instagram, because it really shows the heartache that they had in parting from each other. It was very moving. Yeah. And you know what I love about your story, and I know it's not finished, but, I actually don't watch the news, the commercial news, but we hear only one side. We don't hear the humanity, really. We just hear the politics and all of that. So this is why I find your story so important.
Yeah, I mean, we had to turn the news off. Could you imagine living?
When
Could
you
you
were
imagine
there.
living in Iraq?
Yeah.
and you're listening to the news and CNN and BBC saying, "Oh, the ISIS have captured," and when they were putting them in the jumpsuits and they were, doing all those terrible scenes that everyone, the media just gobbled up.
Yeah.
And we're like, "Oh, that's 2 hours away from us." It got to the point when my wife at one point was like calling me, "Tim, can you quickly come home?" She just saw someone that was black wearing all black on the roof. A couple, we didn't live in a compound. We lived in a little, in a home, just in a little community with everybody else. And she just was like afraid, not because she had anything to be afraid of, but because she was filling her mind with. So we're like, you know what? We're like you. We just don't watch the news. It's not true. It's not.
So can I ask you a question? You don't need to go into too much detail, but how did you cope mentally, emotionally, being in that environment to not be in fear all the time? Like, obviously you're going to be getting thoughts of fear, and because that's natural. We all have thoughts of fear, no matter where we are. I know you're a Christian, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know if you want to share how you personally coped with that. If that's something you want to share.
Well, you brought up Christian, and I would say this. I'd say I believe that God is love. That's what I believe, right? And you could point to a Bible verse that says it, but regardless, to me, the essence of God is love. Perfect love casts out fear, right? And love is something that I believe can only be truly transmitted relationally. It's a give and a take. It's an internal give and take too. It's love your neighbours, you love yourself. Now, when we lived in this town, these beautiful people, the people of Saran, loved us.
Wow.
How can you live in fear when the people around you, when I had to go back to the US to do some fundraising, to try and raise money to build a school and to build a medical clinic and to do what we were doing, I left my wife with my 3 kids in this town for 10 days, right? I went to try and, get the support we needed. Do you know, we didn't have to send an email out, can you deliver meals to my wife, or can we put on a WhatsApp group? Every single day, meals were brought over from our neighbours. Every single day, the young women in our neighbours came over to help Sarah look after the children. Didn't have to ask. It was their obligation, their duty, their love, their joy. You're a guest in our town. And if they can treat us like that, who they could be very suspicious of, you're American or Australian, what are you doing here? Are you with the government? Are you trying to religiously convert us to your religion? Like, what other agenda are you really here for? But no, they chose to just accept us and love us and believe the best in us.
That's great to hear.
Can we do the same?
We should be doing that here with our friends. But that's not the story you hear.
No.
Enough of, with Muslims in particular, right?
Especially here in Australia, because we've drunk the Kool-Aid, as they say in America. We've swallowed the propaganda.
So this is great what you're saying.
That someone who identifies as a different religion. I mean, look, if you were a Christian in the Deep South a couple of decades ago and you could have been associated with the Ku Klux Klan. I mean, like, hatred lives in anywhere. It can live anywhere. And so can love.
Anywhere. Yeah. And I think true love is action.
Yes.
And that's just it. True love is action.
And and we received it. So when you go back to how do you cope mentally, how do you live in a harsh land where everything screams at you, you don't belong, it's different, where we didn't have power for most of the day, half the day, you don't have power, it's 50 degrees heat, you get water delivered every couple of days, you can't do the washing when you want to do the washing, you've got to monitor everything, you basically camping, living life like you're camping, like.
And you're in the desert, right?
Well, we're in the mountains, but it was like in the summer, it's like 50 degrees every day and dry. That's Celsius. And then in the winter, it snows. And it's just 360 degree snow-capped mountains around you.
And what work were you actually doing in there?
Yeah.
So you were
the organisation was World Orphans, and we had a community centre that was being built at the time when we got there. And then we ended up just building micro-refugee villages. These families were just fleeing, and they would flee in like groups of 20, 30 families. You know, their uncles and aunties and their brothers and their sisters, their neighbours were all relatives. And so they would just kind of flee in these groups of about 100 or 120 people. Yeah. So instead of getting caught into like a 20,000 person refugee camp, they were making our way to our region, and we thought, well, let's, we didn't think, but we consulted with the local mayor and the government, and we kept them in these like groups of families, and they cared for themselves. They didn't need security. They didn't need, if one person got a job, they'd share it with everybody else. There wasn't this competition that happens in the larger camps. And so it was just like this perfect number of people that were related that naturally cared and had the dignity to be able to do that. We built for them their own bathrooms and their own kitchens so that they didn't feel like they were in some prison, going to some, like being depending on everyone and everything for everything. So, yeah.
So you eventually left after 3.5 years.
Yeah.
Did those... You don't call them camps, do you? Did you call them
micro-villages?
Micro-villages. Did they continued on, or did they go back to where they came from?
So the people that occupied at the time, almost all of them have gone back to their homes. However, the Syrian war and civil war is still going on, and there's other Syrian families that have been displaced for 10, 15 years that have since then moved in to occupy, and because they're still unable to go back into parts of Syria that are still... Afrin and so many parts of...
So the facilities you put in place are being used?
Oh, yeah, they're still being used. Okay. There's a school that's still being used. There's a medical clinic, which is a mini hospital really, that's being not only used for these families but is serving the local community as well. So
that organisation you worked for, are they still running that?
Yeah. So World Orphans still operates there. Yeah. And
so you left.
Yes.
You came to Australia. Is that correct?
Yes, we did come to Australia. We went via New York and spent a few months there, nice. And then just kind of like plonked here. I didn't know what I was going to do.
Are you a Queensland boy?
Most of my life is.
I mean, I know
in Australia
overseas,
is definitely
when you came back here,
I'm a Maroon. I'm a
Queenslander.
You're a Maroon. Yeah.
We won't hold that against you. No, it's actually I'm a Queenslander
there
too.
You
so
go.
yeah, I'm not really into football.
No, neither am I. I don't like rugby.
No, they hurt each other. I find the violence really difficult. But that's me. I'm just a softie. Anyway, so you came back and did you immediately start up youbelong.org?
Within a few months.
Yeah.
I mean, I was Uber driving.
Huh.
I was like, we didn't have it. We kind of had a pretty quick exit. We had 12 hours. I shared with you our exit when we first got there, our kind of evacuation that we had to do. Well, we had to leave again. And it was we had 24 hours to make up our mind whether we're going to stay.
Is that because ISIS were coming towards you?
No, ISIS
what was
defeated,
the reason?
but the region we were living in decided to have a referendum and break away from Iraq. The Kurdish region wanted to break away from Iraq, so it's a northern part of Iraq. And as you could tell, Baghdad and the southern part of Iraq were like, you ain't going to break away.
Yeah.
And then the Kurds living in Iran, if they broke away and formed their own country, the Kurds living in Iran would want to break away and form their own Kurdish country, and the Kurds in Syria would want to do the same, and the Kurds in Turkey would want to do the same. See, the Kurdish people are like anywhere from 30 to 40 million people in the world. They don't have a country of their own. And so they've wanted independence. And so this group in northern Iraq said, let's have our independence. Now's the time. They voted in favour of it, and then overnight, Iran, Iraq, Syria and Turkey, who surround them, closed all the borders. They said, you've got 3 days and we're shutting down the airport. My wife was pregnant with number 4, and the families were already moving back to their homes, and we're like, you know what? I think we should go home. We're going to go home to have the baby. I think we should just go home now. And we did, and my wife and children have never since returned. I've gone back.
Oh, have you?
Once, but it was a pretty traumatic. We just left everything, and we dropped it all and landed in Australia.
And how many hours? Like what sort of time
literally
frame?
12 hours to pack everything up.
So that's pretty.
When we made the decision.
Well,
but
life's like that.
Life's
sometimes.
like that.
You've got to go. You've just got to make a
You
decision.
don't know.
And just trust, really.
Yeah.
And letting go. You know, that's one of the trickiest things in life is letting go. Letting go of perceived the future. Letting go of the past. Letting go of the present. And it's letting go is a skill.
I like that you say that, because at the time it felt like I was giving up.
Yeah.
And I think the stubbornness, it was actually my wife. Are you going to make me cry?
Oh.
I remember just my wife saying, I think it's time we have to leave. I'm a stubborn person. I'm like really... I'm pretty got a lot of determination, you know, and I knew it was time. And she just looked at me. She said, Tim, I'll never forget this. She said, whatever you do, I know you're going to do so good. I am so proud of you. At the moment when I felt like we were losing everything that we had built, our life, our friends. I mean, we didn't have time to even say a proper goodbye to people who were our closest friends in our whole entire life. But for her to just look at me with such loving confidence and say, I believe in you, and whatever you do, you always do a good job at, it made it easier to just, I guess like what you say, just let go and just... I can do that. It was really hard. Probably the most hardest things I've ever done in my life.
Yeah. Wow. But you did it. And how beautiful that your wife was so supportive.
Oh,
I mean,
always
she
has
knows you probably better than anyone. So
everywhere I go, I will tell her she's the hero in our family. I told you before what she did in Africa. She could do what I was doing. She had to stay in home most of the time and raise our children and homeschool the children. She built and established a preschool whilst we were there for the children and trained up all the teachers there. I mean, the things that she did and the legacy she left there, incredible. But here's the thing. If it was me that was going to stay home and raise the children and homeschool the children, there's no way I could have done what she did. She could easily do what I've done. I'm almost certain. And that to me is that to me is like, look, that's what makes her much more, in my eyes, remarkable and wonderful than, you know, I get to be the one that gets up and do TED Talks and speak, and people think, but they don't realise.
no,
It's a team.
it is a team, and I mean, you're blessed to be in a partnership like that, in a relationship. That's fantastic.
Mm.
You know, here's to more of that.
It's a gift.
More of that. Yeah. She's a valuable person by the sense of things.
She's put up with a lot.
So anyway, you came back and you were an Uber driver.
I was an Uber driver.
And that would have been discombobulating, right? Because you've gone from running, doing all these things to
carting drunk teenagers around in the middle of the night.
And it's like, what
in
the hell
the
am I
Sunshine
doing,
Coast,
right?
you know?
Yeah. So
They have no idea what's going on.
No. And
what's
that
up and
could,
down.
you know, could turn you into someone who's cynical and bitter and all of that. It could.
100%. I think I was gifted again with the discovery that the very same people that we were caring for in Iraq were now being given visas to Australia.
Yes.
And I just started driving every week that I could. I drove up to Toowoomba, 3 hours there, 3 hours back. Anytime I could, I would go up there and just meet with these families, spend time with them and speak their language, because I could somehow speak their language. I could understand their culture. I knew their religion. So different and misunderstood from anybody else. No one really, even to this day, fully understands it.
That, right?
Well, I mean, I'd been to their holy temple like 12 times. I've sat down with their Pope, their Sheikh, their Baba Chawish, who's still there, Baba Sheikh, who's since died and is passed on. But, I mean, these were their precious people, and I felt like family again.
So, youbelong.org.au is the organisation that you're currently, just quickly before we finish, do you want to just give us a little bit of a rundown on what work you're doing at the moment, so people out there can look you up and connect in any way, help in any way if they feel so led?
Yeah. Well, you just said, like, within a few months, if you don't feel a sense of, in crazy transition in life, if you don't feel a sense of safety, security, of belonging, you can really quickly turn cynical and resent where you've come from or where you've been, what's happened to you. It's so important within the first 6 months that a refugee, someone that's finding their feet here in a new land, feels a sense of welcome and support. It can be the most pivotal moment in their life for the rest of their journey and settlement here in Australia. And so we've prioritised the first 5 years of a refugee's life. We provide English curated classes where it's more one-on-one. We provide trauma care programs that are a group workshop that are for children in schools as well as for the adults. We have all kinds of social activities and picnics and events. We have a podcast called Who Is My Neighbour to educate and inform the Australian public about these incredible people and their incredible journeys, just the way as you interview people. You know, everyone has a remarkable story. They just need to have the opportunity to listen. And so that's what we do. We just facilitate the community of Australia to engage with the most remarkable people on the planet, these waymakers, these people that are not refugees anymore. They truly are the ones that are making a way and leading the way.
And this is primarily in Toowoomba that you're working?
Primarily in Toowoomba, and in 2 days, on December the 10th, Human Rights Day, we are launching You Belong International.
Oh, yay!
Isn't that amazing?
That's fantastic.
I'm going to be in.
Wow.
I'm going to be in the US in January.
Yeah.
We've launched our US office, You Belong, in the USA, and so I'm going to be spending some time meeting with partners and hopefully going to the Middle East and Europe to start work on some projects in Greece, in Turkey, in Israel and Palestine, and we are just so excited.
Wow.
So
that's
jump on
great.
board and read more about what we're doing. It's really exciting.
Yeah, so I'm going to provide a link in the notes in the podcast, so if you make sure that you give that to me. Unfortunately, we've run out of time.
I know. I can talk. I'm sorry.
No, it's great. I have so appreciated what you're doing, but also making yourself available.
Love it.
For the Boffola Podcast. So everyone, yahoo! Thank you, podcast listeners. I just so appreciate you checking in and listening to Tim and myself jabber on and just have a wonderful time here and go well, live in peace, live in joy. Ciao.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Justice Matters. I'd also like to shout out to the Patreon community that financially supports this podcast. Guys, thank you so much for your support. And you can join them simply by going to patreon.com/Justice Matters, where a simple donation of $5 a month, you can become part of the Patreon community and get access to behind the scenes content and extras that I share just with you. And lastly, there is another really important way that you can help support the podcast, and that's simply by rating it or leaving a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, maybe by subscribing on YouTube. Yes, we are a video podcast as well. Guys, thank you so much for listening in to this episode of Justice Matters. Please come again soon. I can't wait to share more episodes with you. Thank you so much. I'm your host, Tim Buxton. Thanks for listening.